Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome back to AI and the Future of Work. Thanks again for making this one of the most downloaded podcasts about the future of work. If you enjoy what we do, please like, comment, and share in your favorite podcast app. And we'll keep sharing great conversations like the one we have for today. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. I'm also an investor in and advisor to more than 30 AI-first startups and a firm believer in the power of technology to make humans better. If you're passionate about changing the world with AI, or maybe just looking for your next adventure, let's talk. Now, we learn each week from AI thought leaders. And of course, the added bonus is you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact: everyone's favorite, we'll call him a carnival barker and an AI entrepreneur, Elon Musk, presided over this past week's Tesla AI Day. It was mostly, by his own admission, a recruiting event, but we also saw an early prototype of Optimus, the ominously named Tesla bipedal humanoid robot, scheduled for general availability sometime between 2025 and 2027. It doesn't do much now, but considering the 2021 big reveal involved, I kid you not, a dude in spandex on stage, there seems to have been some progress in the past 12 months. Optimus may someday power Tesla auto factories. Musk says much of the innovation behind Optimus is related to auto-labeling video data from Tesla's, the automobile, using machine vision plus some new battery chemistries that could allow it to operate for a full day on a single charge, which, as we know from talking to great guests like our friend Jim from Zebra, would be a pretty impressive feat. We've learned that innovation always wins. We've also learned to never bet against Elon, so stay tuned for exciting news about Optimus. As always, we'll link to details about Optimus and this week's activities in the show notes. But now shifting to this week's conversation. We had a great discussion with Deepanita Das, CEO of Sorcero, back in April, about how AI is helping researchers in hard science fields find the most relevant content faster in academic journals. We discussed that it's not just a discovery and information retrieval problem, but also a trust and reliability problem. Like the challenges we face with content integrity in our social feeds, researchers also need help figuring out what to believe when using data found online to make decisions that may impact lives. For example, which drugs to develop, or where the next famine may occur, or how to build stronger bridges, or which tactics are most effective at preventing crime in at-risk neighborhoods. Well, today's guest is an entrepreneur and a data scientist who needed more reliable access to evidence-based information that he could actually trust. After nearly 3 years as an analytics specialist at DraftKings, the sports entertainment company, Eric decided it was time to begin his entrepreneurial journey. Since then, he's raised a pre-seed round, assembled a team, and launched Consensus to help researchers find better answers faster. Today, we get to learn from an expert how generative AI is used to retrieve and analyze information. And without further ado, Eric Olson from Consensus. It's my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by maybe having you share a bit more about your background and how you got into this space.
Yeah, thanks for having me in that awesome intro, Dan. So yeah, I think first, maybe I'll just give you a sentence or two on what we're doing, and then I'll give you a little backstory on how I got there. So yeah, I'm with Consensus, and it's a new search engine that uses large language models to try to find answers in scientific research papers. Idea basically being you can type in a plain English research question, and we will try to surface findings from papers that answer that question. And how I got into the space is kind of exactly like you said. I have a background in data science, so it's kind of a more traditional machine learning and data science approach to all these models, but never really had experience with NLP. But I have a family that has a background in research and academia, and I kind of felt like this outsider to the scientific world. But I loved consuming scientific content. I loved listening to podcasts when scientists would go on them, or reading a nonfiction book by a scientist. But getting that information on demand as a layman, as a non-researcher myself, is incredibly difficult. Google is just explicitly not designed to be delivering us factual information about these topics. And traditional academic search engines that send you links to papers, haven't updated in a decade, and people like myself who are not trained to do them and may have, some attention deficits, not that likely to pop open Google Scholar to really try to get quick and easy access to evidence-based information. So that was really the problem statement of just, feeling that pain of it being really hard to find trusted evidence-based information and thinking, hey, what if there was a way to automate this process? I actually came up with that idea 6 or 7 years ago, and then it was throughout COVID, having a little time, extra time on my hands, no longer commuting to work, doing research on the technology that would enable something like this to happen, and realizing that it had just taken a massive leap forward, and NLP, natural language processing, was at a point that it could actually solve this problem, and it could actually just solve this problem as of, a year ago. So kind of was this light bulb moment of, hey, if there's a time to go after a problem like this, it is right now.
Search engines are usually free and ad supported. What's the business model behind Consensus?
Yeah, great question. So right now it is completely free, but in the future it will be a freemium subscription model. So depending on a lot of things over the next few months, it will depend on what premium features we're able to put out and what just user usage looks like. We will have some sort of paid option that will be premium features and or usage based. So there might be a world where you're allowed 5 free queries, then you'd have to pay a subscription, or some combination of that with the premium features that our users are requesting. We build and we put the paywall behind those. And we think that the way that search engines are free today is because they're advertising based models, right? They make money because they show people ads when they're using them. And that is the root of a lot of the problem statement that we're trying to go after, that if a product like that has an advertising based model, they just can't be incentivized to be delivering you the best information. Their North Star metric becomes engagement and eyeballs to try to sell more ads, and not, am I delivering the correct and more valid information? So we think that, being an advertising based model is pretty antithetical to what we're trying to accomplish.
The best tech companies are usually the brainchild of entrepreneurs who experienced the pain themselves and needed a solution. So maybe whether it was at DraftKings or another point in your career, what's a problem that you've actually encountered that Consensus would solve?
Yeah, my work at DraftKings wasn't too, it's relevant in the sense that I was working in machine learning and understanding how to take complicated inputs and hopefully delivering something that gives you a nice, simple output, but the subject matter is quite different. So it really is more about in my personal life. And I think it's one of our huge advantages that both me and my co-founder, who's a former college friend and college teammate of mine, who also has the unique background of being a former college athlete who comes from a family of academics. So we kind of share these similar personalities, that we really are trying to build this product for ourselves. Because we've both felt this problem so deeply. And, I don't even think I need to give an explicit example, but just like generally speaking, if I'm trying to learn about what supplements actually are backed by research that actually are effective in helping X, Y, and Z, or I have an autoimmune disorder where I have pretty bad inflammation and I want to learn what actually, helps reduce inflammation and isn't just, isn't bogus. If you type in what supplements help with inflammation into Google, the first thing that's going to come up is a bunch of ads for a bunch of supplements. So that in and of itself is just, it's really blocking that process of trying to find good information about questions like that. So that's just kind of one example of generally feeling that personal difficulty of trying to learn what the research says about my questions in a quickly and easy to understand manner.
So we've all learned over the years that the problem with traditional search engines is that you can find something online that will confirm every belief that you could ever possibly have.
Certainly.
And just because of the economics of the web and a lot of perverse incentives that content creators have, that's perpetuated over the years. How's Consensus going to solve that?
Yeah, one that is certainly true. And to be just totally honest, it is not true in science as well, right? there is a huge reproducibility crisis of scientists massaging results to get a certain output, because they're humans too. And the same reason why an editorialized article is really trying to hammer home a certain belief, many times, sometimes studies themselves are. Now, to give the scientific process and science as a whole some credit, it is most certainly a better starting point than editorialized content. So having kind of this sandbox to play in that is all peer-reviewed research inherently, in our opinion, gives us a step above content that you could just be searching that could be anything, and is many times just editorialized content. Again, please don't mistake that for me saying that all peer-reviewed research is perfect and doesn't have its own problems. So I think that's one that it gives us a better starting point. I think two is our incentives. Again, going back to we don't show any ads, so we don't care about, we want to get you your answer and get you out of the product, and all of our incentives are to deliver you good information. So hopefully over time that results in a better user experience of getting better information. And then third, there's some of this already in the product. If you're to go and use it, you'll see some of the tags we have on the results. So when you get a list of results, they're basically a list of conclusions of authors that hopefully are related to your question. One of the tags that we have added to those results is what we call our journal rigor tag. And this is an independent analysis of the methods used by journals. It's by a company called SciScore, and they've conducted the largest analysis of scientific methods ever. They went through 1.5 million papers, measured on a criteria of how rigorous they are and how likely the studies within them are to reproduce, how often they're blinded, randomized, use a diverse population set, have adequate effect sizes, so on and so forth. And they used that to rank the journals. So it's really the first pass at ranking journals on something other than, how many citations the journals have, which have a whole bucket of worms of problems that come with that. And that is just, that is one small step in trying to add these rigor metrics to the product. But that is where we want to go, is continuing to add more metrics and more tags and more indicators around a subject like that. So basically the North Star being there, can we put in metrics and tags that indicate how likely a given finding is to reproduce? So basically this is all under the bucket of adding things to the product that help a user understand the potential quality of the research.
So the founding vision for consensus sounds so elegant. It's almost like this Socratic process of asking questions and uncovering, this kind of latent knowledge. And it almost implies that, like, there's a right answer. Like, what's the best combination of supplements, or how do I reduce my inflammation, or whatever. But we know that the peer-reviewed research itself is contradictory, because there are different opinions about supplements and inflammation and things like that. So when consensus is applying a label or multiple labels, isn't consensus in some sense editorializing about how to disambiguate these contradictory results that are in peer-reviewed research?
Great question. So, inherently when you have a search product, there's some of that where, like, you're searching for a question and you're going to be getting a list of responses that inherently have some editorialization in those responses, just based on the way that the studies were conducted. Why we think we're a little bit different there is that, we're not adding anything ourselves. None of this content is generated. It's all extractive. And we're trying to say it everywhere in the product that what you're looking at is not a final truth. It's not a final stance. It is a reflection of what the research says. And where we want to get to, there's two things I'll talk about of where we want to add to help address this. So the name consensus is because of what our vision is for the product, and what we're working on in the background is to be able to summarize across papers. So we extract these claims, and if you say, is X, Y, and Z good for me? We can find the 100 papers that have said yes, the 75 papers that have said no, and the 50 papers that have said, maybe, and put those into those buckets, allow you to search within those buckets if you want, but basically give you in one shot a summarization of the consensus of the research. But what consensus doesn't mean is that there is a universal answer. All it means is we're trying to give you a representation of what the research says quickly. And then the other part of this is things we want to add in the more short term are context around the results. So I talked about the the quality side, but there's another side about like the parameters of the experiment and the population used to know if a certain thing applies to you. Because continuing to go on our supplement example, seeing a claim that says, yes, magnesium helps me sleep, that's wonderful. But the population might have been people with intense insomnia who are over the age of 60, and that might not apply to you. Luckily, those are all things that are able to be extracted using machine learning from papers. And that's a feature that we're working on right now, of being able to have these results, have a little drop-down menu that says, who is this experiment for? Does this potentially apply to me? So I guess like to summarize all of it, consensus is not meant to say that everything has a universal yes or no answer. It's meant to say that what we're trying to do is quickly give you a reflection of what the research says, even if it is contradictory. And if you use even this early version of consensus that is still just on a single paper level, if you type in a question that has contradictory research, you will see that directly on the screen in front of you. We send out a newsletter every week of an interesting query that we came across and send it to all our users to, kind of get them thinking about interesting ways to use consensus. And one I sent out, I think it was 2 weeks ago, was, does the death penalty actually reduce crime? And if you type that question into consensus, there's the first, I believe, 8 responses. Perfectly, every other one rotates of saying yes and no. And that's great. Like, that is not the product not doing its job. It's exactly what it should be doing. So again, consensus is not meant to portray that there is a perfect answer for everything. It's just meant to portray we're trying to give you what the consensus of the research says about something.
So extracting these summaries from these peer-reviewed papers is obviously a hard technical problem. I teased in the opener about generative AI, which is certainly a hot topic in the AI community. Talk us through how you're using generative AI using large language models, and what's the hardest technical problem you and the team have solved.
Yeah, generative AI is extremely hot right now, and that's all anybody in the tech world can talk about on Twitter right now with DALL-E and those image generators. We actually are not using generative AI. We are using extractive large language models. So effectively what we're doing is we're using these large language models to read through a paper and pull out the sentences in which authors are making a claim based on their evidence. So we hired a team of, it was like a dozen PhDs to go through tens of thousands of papers and just go through each sentence and mark it as a 1 or a 0. Is the author making a claim? We then take all that data, feed it to a large language model for then a model to learn, what does it look like when an author is making their own original claim based on what they found in their paper? We then can extract those sentences from papers, and then you basically build a separate large language model that tries to pair those answers to questions. So it's a fine-tuned Q&A system that says, given the question, what are the claims that are answering and providing insights to those questions? So there's actually kind of 2 main large language model engines in the whole pipeline that you'd be using consensus for. There's this extractive piece, which is trained on PhD annotations. And then there's this Q&A piece, which also is trained on another set of annotations where basically we gave, and this is, I think, the most challenging one. I'll give you an example. So before we fine-tuned it, we tried to use a more basic system of question and answer matching. We saw this reoccurring problem pop up where, pretend you said, I keep going back to supplement examples, pretend you said, what are the benefits of vitamin D? What we kept seeing coming up would be, there are many benefits of vitamin D. And that's, for a simple system that is trying to do some like similarity matching and using large language models, that's a perfect answer, right? It has a lot of the similar words. It is kind of getting at the meaning of the question. But if we're thinking about it in like a real context, that isn't what we want to deliver. We want it to be, the benefits are X, Y, and Z. So we called it the vitamin D problem. And we tried to figure out like, what is a way that we could train a model to actually take that next step and understand that this is kind of answering the question and it's very similar. So a less intelligent system may call this a great answer. We need to train a system that says, no, that's actually a terrible answer. And we want to get to the real, root of what an answer to this question is. So what we did is we fine-tuned our own version of a Q&A model, and we took 500 sample questions of what we think people would be asking consensus. We used some of our early user testing data to populate these questions, and we gave each one of those questions 20 possible answers. So 20 claims that we've extracted from papers. And then we sent those off to a bunch of scientists and we said, score these question and answer pairs. So we now have a giant set of annotated data that is, here's your prompt, here's a potential answer, how well does it do it? Feed that to a large language model to teach it to say, get to the actual answer of these questions. And try to rank the possible answers, and that is the model that is now being used in the product. When you type in a question, try to surface you the best possible answers.
That's a fascinating approach, which I could imagine is well optimized for precision, but when it comes to recall in a general search engine, it will be poor because at some point you have to have made some decisions about what peer-reviewed research to have the PhDs hand label. So presumably a bunch of them are related to crime and maybe how the death penalty impacts crime levels, and maybe about supplements. But there's a wide set of topics that people might ask about. How do you think about compensating precision for recall?
Yeah, great question. I guess the first answer is that will always be somewhat of an issue. We try to, and the way we try to mitigate it is we do try to have it be a very diverse question set, from social sciences questions to biology questions. And we really do our best to try to make it diverse, but inevitably there are going to be topics and domains that aren't covered in the training set. And the hope, and what we have seen a lot of promise that this is partially true, is that it isn't always about the models, quote unquote, learning about the subjects that makes them be able to provide good answers. It's more about like the structure of the sentences and the way they're written, and like the semantic way the sentences are structured, as opposed to the core subject matter of them. And in the extractive model, we found that to be true. And basically, like, it wasn't about the models. It would differ how well it did across domains a little bit, but not that much. And we found that to be more about medical papers tend to have claims written that are really, really clean. These results suggest that magnesium helps you sleep. Like, that is how a lot of medical papers are written, and less about the fact that it was unclear about certain subject material, because the differences between accuracy and domains was pretty small. There was some, but it was not massive. And we attribute that to the models learning about the semantic structure of the sentences, as opposed to relying too much on the core subject matter behind it, if that makes sense. And I believe that to also be true in the Q&A system, that it isn't really about, it's not trying to arbit, is this like the right answer? It's trying to arbit, is this a potential answer? And that was part of the instructions we gave, right? When we told the annotators to annotate these, we didn't say, mark it really bad if it's a really great potential answer, but you think it's wrong. That deserves full credit. You may think it's wrong, but that's not what we're asking you to do. We're asking you to mark, is this a potential great answer? So we think that a similar thing is also at play there, that it's much more about the semantic structure of the sentences than the core subject matter.
I get the approach. It totally makes sense. But as a thought experiment, have you compared the performance of the hand-labeled data from the PhDs versus a publicly available LLM like GPT-3 or Google Palm or something like that, just to see how the PhDs performed?
Yeah, I mean, we've played around with GPT-3's Q&A system quite a bit. I don't have any like hard numbers to say like how they compare. I'd say that the GPT-3's Q&A system is super interesting, and it usually does spit out a pretty good answer if you say what are the benefits of something, but it kind of reads like a canned sentence from like the top of a Wikipedia article. The big problem with generative AI in accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish is generative AI doesn't cite its sources yet. So it's effectively just kind of coming up with these answers out of thin air. And part of the, it's obviously trained on this giant corpus. So it's not out of thin air, but you don't understand what the source material of how they derive that answer is. And that's, a pretty giant problem in the scientific space. So we kind of think of that as, we've thought about building generative Q&A systems, but we've kind of always thought about it as like a fun feature, but couldn't really be the core product yet until we address some of those limitations.
So a researcher does a search, submits a query to consensus,
yeah,
and they make some decision. based on information consensus provides. And hypothetically speaking, it leads to some kind of harm to people. They make a decision about, how much vitamin D to give a patient. They make a decision about, how to regulate which crimes should be given the death penalty, things that matter.
Yep.
Now, consensus can't be blamed for the underlying content, but it surfaced the answers and implied that these are actionable. What responsibility do you and consensus have for actions taken using data that consensus delivered?
Yeah, no, totally fair question. I think first and foremost, if you play around with the product at many different points in time, we do try to give disclaimers and say kind of exactly that you see this result screen, don't take this as just a final truth answer. And if there's going to be action taken, you need to do your due diligence of reading through the papers that these answers are coming from. We have a tag in the top left that says beta on it, and if you hover over it, it gives you that message. When you join the product, we have a little walkthrough that ends with that exact message. So we want to try to say that as much as possible and put it throughout the product, that these various disclaimers and encouraging people to do their due diligence. And then, beyond that, we definitely help ourselves some by not generating the content. It is merely extractive. So we really don't have much difference in liability than a traditional academic search engine that's just delivering you the links to the papers. The only difference is that we've gone the step of going into the papers and pulling out some information that's hopefully related to your question. But again, it still is just meant to be trying to serve as a reflection of what the research says to your questions. And that inherently takes some of the onus off of us, that all we're trying to do is, all we're doing is just showing you what content is already out there, not creating our own and synthesizing in a way that leads to an explicit recommendation.
I'm going to take the topic of generative AI one step further. And I'm going to just throw out this hypothetical that we're rapidly approaching a time when the integrity of content we find online is going to be even more questionable than ever, because there'll be a time soon when most of it will have been generated by AI. And so whether it's a deep fake and you don't really know who's in the video that you're watching, or a scientific recommendation, cold from who knows what sources, and there may not be a human actually behind it to take ownership.
Scientific papers written by AI in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So fast forward to a time that's probably not too far in the future. Is consensus more important then? Is it a harder technical problem to solve? Like, what do you think about launching consensus into a world when the author and the integrity of content will be less reliable than ever?
Yeah, super interesting question. To take a little bit of a positive spin on it, and how I think consensus can help too, is this is kind of a part of that, is when the technology gets to a point to be doing all these things you mentioned, that also means that the technology is able to help solve some of the problems that it creates, or like it does the increase in the graph and technological capability doesn't only swing toward the negative, right? There are ways that the same technology that is causing the problems is the same technology can help chip away at some of those problems. And that'd be my overarching answer, is that I hope that when these things come up, then there's also technology that gets really good at detecting it. And, if we get to a world, fast forward 15 years, where consensus hopefully still exists and there's AI generated papers, like those, deserve their own tags in our product in a certain different way of representing them. And, I'd hope in science specifically that there would be some guardrails put in place that makes you have to disclose that. But if, there's people inevitably working around that system, hopefully there's ways to detect that. And, talking earlier about the quality of research, what makes me really excited about how AI can help push that forward is AI can be used to extract so many of the different parameters of a paper, and then itself give you this incredibly powerful and scalable way to assess the quality of research instantly, and extract these information from papers and give it this quantifiable score of the potential reproducibility. And that's just one example of how this new technology, like, it isn't all bad. Everyone loves to hypothesize about the negative downsides to it, but there inevitably will be these incredible applications that contribute to the upside and hopefully mitigate some of these downsides. So in summary, definitely scary, it will definitely be able to be possible, but hopefully as technology evolves, there's also solutions that come out of that.
Eric, I got to get you off the hot seat, but
Yeah.
I'm not letting you go without answering one
No,
last
this is
question
great.
for me.
These are great.
So I recently had a friend of mine on the podcast, a guy named Dan Grunfeld, an athlete I greatly admired. He was in the Knicks organization and he played basketball at my alma mater, Stanford, amazing shooting guard. And he's now a venture capitalist and an author. And I asked him how his collegiate athletic career influenced his career, his philosophy, his life. And he gave a really interesting answer. And I as a former collegiate athlete, I know you played football at Northwestern, go Wildcats. Would love to get your perspective. How has that experience shaped your professional career and who you are as a person?
Yeah, another good question. A little bit of a deviation from the future of the dangers of generative AI. I think the number one thing that it taught me that I pull on, nearly every day as an entrepreneur is the forcing function of pushing through the imposter syndrome that you always have. And I grew up out the suburb of Boston, not a football hub. I didn't start playing football until my sophomore year of high school. I come from a family of tall, skinny academics. Never thought of myself as this incredible football player, and was really kind of surprised when I had got these scholarship offers to potentially play in college, and really didn't know if I was cut out to do it, and had these doubts in my heads at all times. Had some success and was able to put myself in a position to be out on the field, and realizing those doubts don't go away. And you still kind of have that voice in your head of like, I don't belong here. Like, what am I doing here? I'm about to be exposed on the field. And sports, people talk about the expression of putting yourself in the arena, and sports forces you to actually be in an arena with hundreds of thousands of people watching against some of the best teams across the country. And, having those thoughts still be in my head, but then having to go out there and then actually, having some semblance of success is an incredibly powerful thing to teach yourself, that it's like, I'm always going to have those thoughts, and everyone has those thoughts, and you just kind of need to ignore them and push forward. And if you always wait until you're perfectly ready to do something, you'll never do anything. And you kind of have to push forward past that imposter syndrome that everybody has at least some semblance of in their head. And I think sports is the best forcing function to teach yourself that. For me, at least it was.
As an entrepreneur, what's the equivalent of that? The come out of the tunnel moment, 100,000 fans screaming, and you underneath the spotlight. What's the equivalent as an entrepreneur?
I'd say probably launching. When we launched 3 weeks ago, and we're open to the public, and we did it on a website called Product Hunt, where people go to find new products. And having this thing that we were kind of secretive about, we had some friends using it, we had some like early waitlist people using it, but we're kind of secretive about it, and didn't you don't get that much feedback when there's only a few hundred people using it. And just having a day when it's like, hey, we're open and we're going to spend all of our time and resources to try to get people to come into it. It's pretty terrifying when you have this thing that's kind of your baby, and this thing that you're really proud of, but that it has some limitations still. And it's like, you have no idea how people are going to think about it. Like, there's these two kind of, and it goes back to like the imposter syndrome in some ways. There's these two kind of conflicting schools of thoughts in your head going on at the same time of, how much work you put into it, all the amazing things it can do, and you're incredibly proud of it. But having all that knowledge, you also know the limitations of it, and that there's some things that don't work exactly the way you'd want them to work. So you have this like intense knowledge about your product that really is this weird, and it's similar to sports, right? Like, all the work you've put in and what you can do, but at the same time, it's like, do I deserve to be out here? Like, what's going to happen? Am I about to be exposed? So it's this interesting rattling that goes on inside your brain when you're kind of put into the arena. And I think that launching a product and saying you're open for business and trying to get as many people to sign up is the best equivalent to running out of that tunnel. I don't want to give VCs that much credit and say that it's like when you get in front of a VC.
So where can our listeners learn more, and more important, how can they help out you in Consensus?
Yeah, so we are completely free. Like I said, at some point in the future, we will move to a freemium model. But right now, our goal is to get a bunch of users and get a ton of feedback about the product. So Anybody is free to come create an account. You can create a free account and get searching at consensus.app.app. Create a free account and start asking your research questions. And then as far as helping, share it with your friends. We've built the product. One of the cool features we have is we've built it to be really shareable. And we think that that's a pretty powerful tool that doesn't exist typically with this type of information. It's not the easiest to share a Google Scholar link to a paper or anything. And we've made the actual findings and conclusions and the links to the abstract easily shareable via text or via social media. So try doing that with your friends. Next time you get in an argument about a subject, try to back it up with some actual peer-reviewed information and throw it into a family group text or something. But yeah, sign, join, search, share.
Eric, it feels like we're just getting started as some of these important topics about ethics and generative AI mature. Be great to have you back on the show if you wouldn't mind.
100%. I really enjoyed it.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. But Eric Olson and Consensus, certainly fair to say that we are all rooting for you to succeed. So best of luck.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. I'm your host, Dan Turchin. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.